offer their services, or these community partners and sponsors offer their advice and help in getting the word out about our events and all that good stuff. So thank you to our partners in that way. Now, I really want to share with you the host and what she does, but I don't think I would do any justice me sharing. She's an amazing woman, and she's the main frontline person in Los Angeles to work with survivors of sex trafficking and prostitution of young adolescent girls. So she's a person that is a powerhouse. Now, before I introduce her, we want to show a quick video, and then she will share about the work that she does. So can we please have the video, Kim Biddle's video? Thank you.
Heard of Saving Innocence, myself that there is trafficking going on in LA, and you don't really think about it. You think about places overseas like Cambodia or the Philippines, but sex trafficking happens everywhere. We've rescued girls off Hollywood Boulevard, Sepulveda Boulevard, around the surrounding of LAX airport. This is happening all over Los Angeles. Human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. It surpassed the trafficking of arms. It will surpass the trafficking of drugs, I'm sure. Gangs who used to sell drugs or steal cars have found it now more lucrative to steal and kidnap girls and sell them on the streets that I live on. See, the thing is, people may think that they're there by choice, that this is the oldest profession out there. But they're forced to do this. They're children. See, the disgusting thing is that the average age of entry into the commercial sex industry is only 12 years old. Supposed to be in school, supposed to be hanging out with their friends, at the mall, watching movies, playing dress up. Not this kind of dress up.
Now I want to introduce you to Kim Biddle, our host, an amazing, amazing person.
I don't think I noticed that music before right now, and I felt like a little jive coming out or something. Need a little energy at the end of the day. Thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's been a long day with a ton of information thrown at you from every angle. I really appreciate you caring about what we do. Like Bonnie said, we really do work on the front lines, so not only is this close to our hearts, but it's our everyday life. And so it's something that for myself and my team at Saving Innocence we're very passionate about because we know these girls and we love them very much. So I'm just gonna kind of do a quick overview. I know Kay did a brilliant job in the beginning of the day talking about human trafficking, but CAST really focuses a lot on international victims in the United States, and they specialize especially with working with survivors of labor trafficking. And one of the reasons why I started Saving Innocence a few years back was because through my international work, I realized that there was a huge gap in the United States. And really in the social cause of understanding modern day slavery, understanding human trafficking. Like Kay said, the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. There's approximately 27 million slaves, yet we're just beginning to talk about this. And as we're beginning to talk about this, we're still not completely understanding who these victims look like, what these who these survivors are, what their stories are, and how we can band together to help them. So if we can go to the first slide. So as you can see, this is very much an American problem. This is just an interesting map of some of the known trafficking routes into our country. So for one, this is a US problem because, well, we create a good portion of the demand around the world for it. Why? Because human trafficking is primarily a monetary-driven crime. So, like Kay said, Japan, Australia, and the United States are really the top 3 countries in the world for trafficking because we have the money to pay for it. We drive the economy of humans being bought and sold. So they come from all over. You know, I think that the most famous cases that, as we hear, are from Eastern Europe and India and Southeast Asia, but they really are coming from around the world. I've done extensive work internationally. I've been to almost 30 countries, did a lot of work doing program development for trafficking throughout primarily Southeast Asia and Africa. And it was really through that work that I kept coming back to this fact. Okay, you know, I'm developing these programs, I'm caring about these amazing people that are oppressed in the third world, but I kept coming back to that fact of what is driving this. Why is this actually happening? And it's happening because of money and because there are people who can afford to pay for things that they want. And the United States is filled with those people. It's one of the reasons why many people come to the United States in general for job opportunities, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why human trafficking even thrives, is because people come thinking this is an opportunity at a new chance at life. And so there's plenty of other criminals who utilize that opportunity and use it to coerce people into a chance at new life and then turn it around for the purpose of exploitation. So I kept coming back to this. This is our problem. This is our problem. We're obviously creating a huge component of the demand around the world. And then I began to think, okay, if all of these predominantly male clients are creating demand for trafficking, I'm more specifically talking about sex trafficking, which is a majority of the trafficking around the world, and women and children are the primary victims of that, then obviously those buyers are returning home. Well, if you have a sickness and you travel, that sickness is going to travel with you wherever you go. So if there are men traveling for the purpose of sex tours, of, you know, what stays in Vegas, you know, what you do in Vegas stays in Vegas, that's the mentality of when people travel around the world and they're seeking buying children for the purpose of sex or women for the purpose of sex. That mentality comes home with them. So if that mentality comes home with them, then what does that say about our own women, our own children? They don't just leave that moral and cultural value system in that other country. And if it's an addiction, which some people would argue that 100% of the people that would buy sex are sex addicts, then that's not something that you can leave somewhere else. That's something that needs extensive rehabilitation. Sex addiction is proven to be more difficult to overcome than heroin addiction. So this is an issue that men are bringing back into our country. So if that's true, then that's also, therefore, it must be affecting the people here that could be vulnerable enough to exploit and bought by these men. Go to the next slide, please. So to quickly review what Kay has said, what is sex trafficking? Just to reemphasize that those 3 criteria that she talked about was force, fraud, or coercion, and that those don't need to be proven when you're talking about a child, right? It's sort of like how our country I mean, this is an international law, but this is specifically the federal definition that I have up there, and it's, it sort of goes along with the same concept of statutory rape laws. If a 13-year-old is caught in a sex act with a 45-year-old man, because of science and understanding child development and a lot of things that make a lot of sense about what dictates why we make laws the way they do, we've determined that it's not possible to hold that child accountable for that type of decision. So that same mentality and that same concept must be applied to trafficking, because the only difference between a child who is 13 having sex with a 45-year-old and what some might term child prostitution, which is a term I'll get to later, which we do not use because we don't believe that term makes sense, is that there's an exchange of money. That's the only difference. So why, in our country, have we been criminalizing or holding children accountable for something that other laws have, for many years, been determined to say that a child cannot make that type of decision for herself? When money is an exchange of money between hands is the only difference between those two people in the scenario, to which, by the way, she never keeps any of the money, and it really goes directly to her slave driver, trafficker, captor, right? Next slide. So, like Kellen said in the video, this is the estimates. We're saying at least, and this is to be very conservative, and to be honest, we're conservative because we don't have great statistics. Why? Well, because this is a new issue that we're really beginning to face in our country, so there's not a lot of great research, honestly. And even though there's a lot of great researchers out there now trying to gather better statistical evidence, this is an issue that's very difficult to collect, right? This is the underground slavery that we once had. I mean, it's very difficult to collect evidence on something that we're not even recognizing. It's underground, we're not seeing it. A very small percentage of the victims are getting rescued. So really our statistics are coming from arrest records, FBI records, nonprofit records as to how many clients they're working with. So this is a small estimate. But I will say that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children estimates this number to be more like 400,000. So when you're thinking about the potential of 500,000 children in our country that are being sold for the purpose of sexual exploitation every year, this is an epidemic that we need to waken up to understand this isn't just the oppressed, exploited child or woman or man in another country, but the same thing applies to the most vulnerable within our society. And just because we're the grand United States of America doesn't mean that there aren't people here that are looking for ways to exploit another person to gain monetarily. Does that make sense? And, Americans around the world are pretty famous for exploiting others for the purpose of gaining monetarily. I mean, that is, unfortunately, sort of a stereotype that many other countries around the world have pinned on Americans. So, of course, that is going to apply to our own citizens, to children who are even born in this country. Next slide. So, what does sex trafficking then look like in our country specifically? Here are, these are not real pictures of real children, but this is a pretty good example that, we worked with blonde hair, blue-eyed girls from middle-class families, and we've also worked with African-American girls from the inner city, and they really come from a wide array of socioeconomic backgrounds. They're children, so they're vulnerable. People want to know, what makes it, how does this happen? How does this happen? What makes them so vulnerable? Well, think back to when you were 12, which is, like Kellen said, the average age of entry. So thinking about the commercial sex industry in our country, the average age, which means we've seen girls rescued from the streets of Los Angeles as young as 9. We think of that as being, if you've seen Born into Brothels or, different countries where children are literally put into this industry by their family members, the same stuff happens here. Law enforcement is corrupt here as well, too. These children don't know how to get out. They don't know where they are. They're moved around. They're vulnerable because they've been neglected a lot of the times by their family, or they've been abused. There's a lot of abuse history in these children's lives, so maybe those red flags don't look quite as red. But predominantly the reasons that they're a vulnerability is that they're a kid who hasn't had a whole lot of life experience. And I don't know if you remember when you were 11, 12, but at that point you were pretty much, trusting of it. You were pretty naive. I was, as a girl in junior high, I mean, my most serious relationship was a week long, and I thought I was in love. I mean, that's like our, that's our context at that age. You think that you're in love because you held someone's hand. So if this older guy approaches you and adorns you with gifts and compliments and shopping sprees and tells you how beautiful you are, and you end up losing your virginity to him, and then he starts asking you to do certain things. These traffickers are sexual predators who prey on the vulnerable and groom them or woo them, much like a child pedophile would, for the purpose of getting that child to become his product to sell. And the most difficult part about that is that that child believes that they've made those choices. They're in love. They're ditching school because they love him, because he's promised them all these dreams. If anyone in here, please raise your hand if you have been in a somewhat shady relationship. Come on, people. Where after you break up, you're like, wait, what was I thinking? Like, how did I not see all these things? My friends told me these things, but I didn't, I've probably been in too many of those. But it's the same, it's like, you're quick to judge, but it's like, once you're out, it's hard to see when you're in. So if you're 12 and you're in that scenario and you think you're in love and he's made you all these promises and then you add onto it all these other factors, now he's hitting you, okay? It takes a woman, statistics say it takes a woman, a grown adult woman, on average, 8 times to leave a domestic violence relationship. Why? Because you're like, wait. I wouldn't choose someone who's an abuser. You start like trying to break down why this is happening. Well, maybe if I was just like this. Well, maybe if I just listened to him, he wouldn't actually hit me. Well, he said he was sorry and it would never happen. You do, right? We do this. No matter how dramatically dysfunctional the relationship is, like, this is part of the human process of trying to figure out, trying to survive, trying to understand. So you put that, so if it takes a grown woman 8 times to leave a bad relationship that's abusive, what is it going to take for a child? Do they even understand that there's another option? Do they even understand how to get out and there's so much shame, they don't talk to family, they don't talk to teachers, and then soon enough, the parents and the teachers just assume that kid has just gotten involved with the wrong crowd, they're delinquents, and then she is very quickly stereotyped as what? A delinquent? Any ideas from the audience? A slut? What else? Come on, not that you think this, but what? Skank? That's why we don't use the term prostitute. A child is not a prostitute. A child has been coerced into slavery and is being commercially, sexually exploited. Using that term for her is inappropriate. You can consider that the act of being prostitution, sure, that's an industry, you can use that term, but do not label her that, because that is not who she is, what she is. She's been coerced into an abusive situation. We need to be able to identify her as a victim or a survivor of sexual abuse. Can we put that slide back up? Oh, the last one with the girls' faces. Okay, so I'm going to tell you, this is a heavy topic, but it's hopeful, because I think once our eyes are opened, we can create so much change. And we can really band together to help these girls. And I wanted to just share one story of redemption and hope from one of our girls. And I wanted to put this slide back up because the top left picture actually looks really, really close to one of our girls, who I'll call Amy. But she literally, just add on maybe hair more like mine. She kind of has like crazy curly hair. But skin tone, face, like she really looks like that. So that will give you an image sort of to go along with the story. But we met Amy when she was 15. She had been in the foster care system since she was 10 going on 11. Mom was pretty neglective, alcoholic, lots of guys coming in and out. Was put into foster system, and a lot of our girls, by the way, are involved with the foster system. Approximately 65% of our girls have been in the foster care system. So when you're thinking about children who are vulnerable, right, these are the most vulnerable because, honestly, if these kids go missing, who looks for them? Nobody. Their name goes back into the system of runaway, period. And there's social workers with 200 caseloads that, will try to follow up once in a while with mom to see if she, and there's, of course, law enforcement that try, but they're so overworked with little resources. It's just, that child does not have a family putting out flyers, banging down doors, looking for these kids, which is why that's a high value for Saving Innocence, is when our girls go missing or when we learn of girls go missing, that's a big part of our partnership with LAPD and even private investigators, where we will search for those girls because no one else is. So side note. But, so she was 10 going on 11, went into the foster system. Like, unfortunately, is very common in the foster system, she was put into a foster home that was pretty abusive and neglective. She was only given bread and water to eat, so she had to start stealing food. So she first entered into then the other system, which is juvenile probation, for burglary. And she was charged with burglary because she was a repeat offender at a store. So she went back to the same store multiple times to steal food. It's kind of a bummer that our system says, hey, we're going to punish you for stealing food and not ask more questions. But, that's part of the broken system. So we're referred her, our agency she was referred to our agency by the time that she was 15. So there was a long gap in there of survival. She was trying to survive on her own. She didn't really have family. She was placed back with her dad for a short period of time, but then she was sexually abused by his friends and was taken away from the home. And so she went through a very rough preteen, who am I, abuse, neglect life, which was the perfect scenario for a trafficker to come in and say, hey, you're beautiful, be in my music video, which is how it started with her. They were up-and-coming rap artists. Be in my music video, and you can live here, and we're gonna travel. And so they started traveling with her around LA and surrounding counties, and eventually dancing in the music video turned into, and she believed that she was in love with one of them. It turned into a full-on trafficking ring, where there was actually 5 traffickers involved in her case, with multiple other children. And we were actually referred to her by the FBI. It had gotten to that point. So the FBI contacted us and said, we have a new investigation. We just rescued these girls. Can you come and help out? So we walked with Amy all the way through her trial. And I will tell you that it is such a joy to sit in front of a child who would have otherwise had no one else there. No social workers were present, no parents were present, no case managers, no therapists, no family support of any kind, no friends. But she was being asked at now 16 to face her 5 traffickers in front of this intimidating courtroom with all of their gang members and family members there present. Can you imagine that as a 16-year-old? I mean, that's traumatizing for anybody. Terrifying. And it's so common for these guys to threaten safety that are real threats. We've had girls in LA that have been murdered, that we've had to relocate families. This is real. It's just as crazy here as it is in Thailand. I know it's hard to believe that this is happening in our streets, but it really is. So we had the privilege of walking Amy through that process and being her support system. And one of the things actually we're selling today are these giving keys. And we always do with our girls, we give them a giving key, and we have them inscribe a word of encouragement that will help them get through the tough times on there for them. And she chose faith, and she's a Christian, and she, somehow through all of that she's been through, still had faith, and so she wanted faith on her key. So I gave her this key, and I can remember her sitting on that stand, and she got up there, and she was completely hunched over, and she was shaking, and tears were in her eyes. And then I looked at her kind of you got this, girl, you're okay. And she grabbed her key, and she sat up straight. And LAPD will tell you that she ended up being the strongest, sassiest witness that they've ever seen. And she single-handedly, because the other girls didn't make it, they were other parts of the country. I mean, she single-handedly convicted 5 traffickers in Los Angeles. Yeah, seriously, give her a round of applause, because she took a very traumatizing situation, found her strength, and that's the privilege that we have as advocates and case managers is to our job is very simple. We love these girls, we earn their trust, we're consistent, and we help them with their resources. They need a lot, because like I said, the majority of these kids come from nothing. They don't have any support system. So basically what we try to do is we help create that support system for them. A comprehensive support system, from medical to shelter to therapy to everything that you can imagine that it will take a human being to recover from something that's so traumatizing. So she completed the trial. She did an incredible job. She found her inner voice. She found her inner strength. She testified brilliantly. Because there was 5 traffickers, there were 5 lawyers defending each one of them. So she had to go through 5 different, what is it called? Not counter arguments, but counter defense, whatever. Where they're, now their job is to basically interrogate the witness to prove that she's an incredible witness. She's lying. She's just, and they will say, aren't you just a prostitute? Aren't you just this? They will demean the witnesses on purpose to try to make them incredible. So again, having a 16-year-old having to go through that 5 different times with 5 different traffickers sitting there who have already threatened your life, who have already raped you multiple times, who have already sold you out to multiple men a night she was held captive by them for 4 months in in Studio City, by the way, which is literally right around a famous landmark hotel that's right around the corner from my house, which is really, it always hits close to home, but that one hit really close to home. It really bothered me because I walk by there every day, and to know that she was held captive there for 4 months is crazy. But she did it. She found her inner voice. She found her inner strength. She did it. All 5 of them were convicted on a state level and are now starting the federal level. So they've faced, because of child pornography and her basically being raped on camera, they get both state sentencing and federal sentencing, which is really good news because state sentencing is pretty bleak. But once federal kicks in, that can add life sentencing, which is more justified considering what she went through. So that was a success story. And then after she was able to complete that successful testimony and trial, she got plugged into a safe house. We had to relocate her. And she's been there now for almost 8 months and is doing brilliantly. I talk to her multiple times a week. We talk to all of our girls multiple times a week. We visit them at least once a week with her because we had to relocate her. We Skype. So I Skype with her once a week, and, she'll call me on the phone about some sort of drama, like, multiple other times a week. And we just really become like a big sister to these girls, and really have the privilege of walking them through the long process, because really the recovery process is long-term. It's not overnight. There's even wounds probably from before the trafficking hit that are now going to have to be addressed as well. Next slide. So these are just some pictures of us working with our girls. This was a conference we held last year. It was the first ever Survivor Empowerment Conference, which was more or less a youth conference for girls that was all about understanding. It was only for survivors of trafficking, so it really addressed some of those issues, but also covered empowerment, affirmation for them specifically. And they bonded with the teachers, and one of the girls even walked away from that weekend saying, for the first time in my life, I actually know what love feels like and looks like. For a lot of these girls, you don't have that frame of reference yet. And so being in a community of people that affirm them and encourage them, and being around each other in that type of empowering community really provides a context for them to move on, to move past, to know that what has happened to me doesn't define me. And in fact, it makes me stronger, and it gives me tools to use against evil now. Now these girls they're such survivors. They're so brilliant and strong and creative. Anyone in here that's starting any kind of social entrepreneurship program, hire our girls. They will be CEOs. Amy, who, all she talks about is wanting to be a social worker now and coming to work for Saving Innocence and be an advocate and speak. And I promise you, in 5 years, I'll be retiring and she'll be running the company. So smart. They're so strong. They've had to be. They've had to survive their whole lives. So the skills that they have make them able to truly be the greatest leaders in our communities, if given the opportunity and if given the support system to do so. Next slide. So this is just, again, this was actually, that actually is Amy when she was in court, at the juvenile court. And so we do a lot of speaking, and we always try to incorporate our girls into trainings and speaking to, again, give them that voice, to be a voice for others who don't have one. Next slide. So just a really quick overview of what we do, and I don't know if you can even see that very well, but our main points are prevention, intervention, and empowerment. So a lot of prevention efforts that we do something called My Life, My Choice workshops, which we work with high-risk youth and survivors of trafficking to really understand what sex trafficking is, to understand what are the warning signs, what is a pimp, what does a pimp look like, what does recruiting look like, what are resources to call if you're in the situation. We even cover certain things like domestic violence and sexual abuse. And we work a lot with group homes, Salvation Army, and inner city schools. So we do a lot of workshops and training for youth because education is power. And almost every school I've been to, they've known somebody. I say raise your hand if you know of somebody who has been exploited in this way, and always hands, tons and tons of hands. And in fact, it's such a cultural problem that I'll tell you, one of my friends is a 5th grade teacher in the inner city, right near one of the largest tracks in LA. And she was teaching spelling, and the word was solicitation. And a 5th grade student came up for the sentence for solicitation as being the girls on the street corner when I walk into school. They know. This is the culture this is the generation that we're raising right now, especially in areas where there is high levels of trafficking, and LA is one of the top in the nation. Why? Because there's a lot of money, There's a lot of people, so their kids are hidden very easily. A lot of different pockets of communities. It's spread out. There's a lot of different law enforcement jurisdictions that if you cross the street now, you're in another jurisdiction. And there's a lot of demand. They estimate that from any given time, there's between 2,000 and 20,000 American children who are being sold in LA, in Orange County. And that given time being usually, if there's an event going on, it goes up. Laker game, up. Porn convention, up. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but there's a porn convention going on this weekend in LA. And I will tell you that my staff has had the phone off the hook. We do 24-hour crisis for girls, and we've had multiple calls from both FBI and LAPD. Why? Because there are tons of girls being brought in, and they're making a huge push for the girls who are already here because men are collecting who are obviously interested in the sex industry, so it brings the demand up, which means the number of products for sale have to increase. Next slide. So this is just kind of an overview of what we do in regards to our partnerships. We're actually the only nonprofit that's contracted out by the Los Angeles Superior Court to work with children who are exploited through commercial sex trafficking. We're also contracted by Los Angeles Probation and LAPD. Those are our main partnerships. We helped form, back in January, the first ever juvenile court, which is the picture that you saw in one of the previous slides, what is being termed the STAR court, which is basically a court for children who have committed some sort of crime but are also recognized as also being commercially sexually exploited. So being able to identify their story is past the burglary charge, or there's more to meet the eye with these kids, and there's a greater need for resources and collaboration that is needed to specifically address what's happening with him, with her. I say him, I meant to say her, but I will, on that side note, say that about 3% of sex trafficking victims are approximate to be male. This primarily is girls who we're talking about. But, so we do a lot of rescue, and we work with the courts, and we do long-term advocacy because one of our main values really is, like I said, creating that long-term care and sense of permanency, because a lot of these kids are bounced around the system so much, they don't really make permanent connections, at least not permanent connections that are safe and trustworthy and healthy. So we follow them. I mean, we have girls now that are over 18. We follow them all the way as long as they want to stay in touch with us and be our friends. We will help them. We actually, one of our girls who's over 18 now, went missing for a long time, recontacted me recently, was back in LA, wanted help, and I was able to provide, I worked with her a long time ago, but then when she turned 18, all of a sudden the system didn't care about her. So I would get these calls. I would get these calls from Nevada and North Hollywood from like police stations saying, yeah, you were like a point of contact, or your name was associated with a group home that you worked with her. So we just wanted to let you know that we booked her for prostitution. And I was like, keep her there. Like, we will, oh, I'm sorry, we already released her. It's just like crazy making, because once she turned 18, no one cared, because now she was an adult making her free will choice, right? I mean, so that is also another issue to understand, that the average age of entry is 12, which means even if women are being exploited for sex, the average age was still 12. So really, I just see adult victims as being children who are never rescued. So we have to even switch our way of looking at that. They've done studies where they will say 98%, and I think that's even low, of women who, even in the bunny houses or whatever those are called in Vegas, were interviewed, and 98% they said they would leave the industry if they felt like they could. So this is not a victimless crime, no matter the age. So we lost her for a while because she turned 18, and then the system really didn't care about her anymore. She was no longer a child that needed people to report on. But she finally found freedom on her own, contacted us and is now, we just reconnect her. We partner with the Children's Alliance in LA, and they've been doing some legal advocacy, and we've managed to get her back in school. So now she's actually able to finish high school. She's back in her senior year in high school, finishing, so she actually gets some of her childhood back and gets some of those normal childhood experiences. So, even for the ones that disappear, hope is not dead. And these girls are such fighters that they will make it happen. And they do. And we honestly just get the privilege of being along for the journey with them and giving them basic level support that they need. Next slide. Next slide, thanks. So here's some contact information for you guys if you want to jot it down. That's our website and P.O. Box. Feel free to contact if you have any additional questions. Check out the website, savinginnocence.org. This is also just a good, general, some of the things that we plug them into, some of the comprehensive services that we give. We're always in need of volunteers. My encouragement to you guys, honestly, walking away from this conference today is don't let education be where this stops for you. It will have been a waste. At the very least, pass it on. Our term is, pass hope on. Hope exists for these kids if you pass it on. Tweet about it, follow us on Twitter, retweet our stuff. Just get word out, get people educated, help your friends, help just your BFFs that have that friendship bracelet with you. Help them understand. Just that 4 or 5 people will make a huge difference if it keeps spreading like that. Open people's eyes. I really believe that Americans are good-hearted people that love causes, that believe in social justice and human rights. And if our eyes are opened, we will create change, and we'll do it victoriously. But an army of 1 or 5 can get some work done. But even though this is a small audience today, even this army right here could get a whole lot done. A heck of a lot done. I mean, we could take LA, right? I mean, this is our city. These are our neighborhoods. These are our churches. These are our friend groups. This is our community. We could at least take LA and just say, not in my city, not in my neighborhood, not to my children. And that is what I encourage you guys to walk away saying, no, not on my watch, not in my neighborhood, not to my family. And take some sort of stand. Volunteer, donate money. That helps us do what we do on the front lines on a daily basis. Donate percentages of profits, from the jewelry sales. That's incredible. It's being responsible. It's taking ownership. And each one of you, whether you like it or not, has ownership in this because this is our village. The old adage, takes a village to raise a child. I actually heard a survivor say this last week, it also takes a village to create a prostitute. So we have to understand that this is a cultural problem that on some level, unfortunately, we all feed. And we also have to take ownership to then reverse it, use some of the tools that we have, whatever we can do, to fight it, create lasting change, and to end slavery in our time. So pass hope on. Thank you so much for listening today, and I'd be happy to talk with anyone after. Thanks.